Hey everyone, so in this video I figured we could continue our discussion of Sherman Alexie's Reservation Blues. I hope you liked the first one, and here we'll be talking about Identity Erasure. Before we go into that, I quickly want to mention the inclusion of an African-American figure in the novel. I think it's great that Alexie sort of creates a dialogue between two oppressed minorities, and the African-American culture is represented here by the African-American blues musician Robert Johnson, who was a real person, actually. He was a real blues musician, and he contributed greatly to the blues genre. He was also known because he died a very mysterious death. Some say that he actually did sell his soul to the devil in exchange for talent, and that the devil actually came to collect. So, it seems a little strange, but, you know, possible, right? So, that happened, and I think it's great that in this novel, not only does Robert Johnson sort of carry over the burden of persecution, symbolized here by the guitar, which was once bestowed on African Americans and has now shifted to the Native American population, he also carries over a means to sort of deal with that, which is the blues genre. And that was a music of choice for African American slaves. They would lament their conditions and express their desire for freedom in those songs. And so now the burden of persecution has shifted, and Robert Johnson also gives them a means to deal with it. However, Sherman Alexie does make clear that these two cultures can't help each other yet. At one point, the band Coyote Springs goes up to Big Mom to ask her for advice, and they also ask about Robert Johnson and they want to speak to him. And Big Mom replies that he's hiding, he's still trying to help himself. I think it's beautiful that Alexie demonstrates that even though these two minorities share a very violent and oppressive past, they can't help each other yet, they can't reach out yet because they still have to finish helping themselves. So I think he does that very nicely. He doesn't really put them in an extreme opposition, but he sort of creates a harmony between them, and I thought that was pretty nicely done. Okay, so let's move on to Identity Erasure. Let me cheat here, let me use my paper for a little bit. Like I said in the first video, the problem of identity really starts with the term Indian, which doesn't refer to any of the customs or traditions of this tribe. It also starts with the fact that they were forced to live on reservations, and so the place, which is, according to Homi Bhabha, a very important aspect of your identity, they were deprived of this aspect. So this process of incarceration, while it is a colonial political strategy, it is also a process of identity and cultural erasure. So that is important, I think, to remember. This process of identity erasure can be seen throughout the entire novel, and I think it's probably most clearly represented by Betty and Veronica, the two groupies in the novel. And their names obviously allude to the well-known Archie comics. Two figures in the Archie comics, Betty and Veronica, whose only purpose is to shop and to strive for Archie's affection. So they're very superficial, and the girls in the novel are pretty much the same. They also start a sort of brief relationship with two of the band members, Junior and Victor, and because of that, they're allowed to join the band very briefly and do backing vocals. So Betty and Veronica in the novel, they actually imitate Indian culture, but not really Indian culture. They actually imitate what they think is Indian culture. So, you know, the feather earrings and all of those stereotypical notions. So not only do they contaminate the band with American influences, but they also contaminate it with what they think is Indian culture. So it is a very ambivalent role that they play, and when the band actually fails at recording an album, the record label executives bring in Betty and Veronica instead because they believe that they've spent enough time with American natives to know what their tradition and their culture is all about. One of the record label executives at one point says, "We can use these women. They've been on the reservations. They even played a few gigs with Coyote Springs. Don't you see, these women have got the Indian experience down. They really understand what it is to be Indian. They've been there." So these characters, Betty and Veronica, they really represent a stereotypical notion of what Indians sound and look like, and they're a perfect illustration of what Lewis Owens describes as stepping into the mask of the other created by the colonizer. And there's a quote by Lewis Owens which sort of explains that. The mask is one realized over centuries through Euro-America's construction of the Indian other. In order to be recognized, and thus to have a voice that is heard by those in control of power, the native must step into that mask and be the Indian constructed by white America. But of course, it is double-edged because as Betty and Veronica assume what they conceive is the Indian identity, they also lose their own. So identity erasure here occurs on both sides. Also, it becomes very clear that Coyote Springs does not conform to this mask because they don't play traditional Indian music, they play rock and roll and blues. So they're not conforming to that. In fact, the only remnant of their heritage is the band name Coyote Springs, and that was already a big point of discussion at first. Thomas suggested the name, and the rest sort of was very skeptical to that. I think Junior said, "That's too damn Indian. It's always coyote this, coyote that. I'm sick of coyote. Fuck coyote," Victor said. So eventually, lacking a worthy alternative, they all agreed that Coyote Springs was probably the best choice anyway. There's one character, he doesn't play a very big role in the novel. He's only mentioned a couple of times. His name is Simon, but I think he's a very nice depiction of the original interpretation of the colonizer, of the American settlers in the beginning. Simon is introduced as a character who only drives his pickup truck in reverse. So I think that while he's not a main character, it does sort of nicely symbolize the original interpretation of Indian culture as a backwards culture, and the first settlers, as well as many generations that would follow, they did indeed look down on Indian culture, and they tried to convert them and made them renounce their spiritual beliefs. So I think that Simon is a very nice sort of side note to that. The contamination of American culture, which is not always such a bad thing in the novel, can also be seen in daily life on the reservations in the form of the commodity food that the Indians are given. So they're given really bad food, the quality is really bad, there's not enough of it, and it's usually like Wonder Bread, Spam, Diet Pepsi, powdered milk, and Diet Pepsi is a real treat. So it is... The food is scarce, it's usually of bad quality, it's usually past its expiration date. But then again, without it, they wouldn't be able to survive. So it is, again, very double-edged, and the same could be said about the band. Without without their traditional aspects, without the sort of hint of their heritage, they wouldn't have been offered to record an album at Cavalry Records, because the record label executives were only attracted to them because they could sell this Indian image, not because their music was actually really good. So again, that's pretty double-edged, and if the band wasn't interested in becoming famous and performing, they probably would have fallen prey to the horrible conditions on the reservations much sooner, which are alcoholism, poverty, domestic violence, suicide, etc. So music in the novel is mostly an element of identity erasure, but it can also be an element of maintaining identity, and we see that in Big Mom's flute playing, which is used to tell the stories of the battles fought at Spokane, as well as the suffering of the natives. So I think that's nice, it's sort of a nuanced view. Alright, so that's it for the video, that's all I have to say on Identity Erasure. The next video will be about Third Space, and I hope you'll watch it. I'll see you then, peace out!